All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another installment of the Clearing the Air series presented by ChemDAC and ASSI. I am your host, Alex Hilliker. It's awesome to be back with you and continue the discussions on AAMI ST58, which, of course, is the standard for chemical sterilization and high-level disinfection in healthcare. For those of you who are just joining us, this is our third episode in the series, if you will. We did a presentation last fall talking about the update to the standard that was released in late 2024. And in February, I was about to say last month, but we are in April now, we held our first ever educator roundtable where 3 industry experts dove deep into the real world impacts of this standard, as well as best practices, challenges, and recommendations for implementing the standard more fully in your department. So that video, I would note, of the roundtable is available on the ChemDAC YouTube page, among other sources, and we encourage people to go and check that out if you weren't able to join us live. The reason that we're doing this, which we've discussed before, but again, for those of you that are joining this series in flight, this particular standard, AAMI ST58, unfortunately, oftentimes seems to get overlooked. And our panel here, along with myself, we believe that should not be the case. And after our recent roundtable event, we continued to receive questions about AAMI ST58, the changes that were made. And we thought, you know what? Let's do a March mailbox feature throughout the month of March where SPD leaders, educators, and technicians around the country could submit questions, and we'll come back on the air and we'll answer them live. And when I say live, we are live. This is going to be the first time that a lot of these questions are in front of us. So we're excited to go through it with everybody here this afternoon for the folks here on the East Coast. So that's why we're here. I could not be happier to have this amazing crew back with me. Before we jump in, let's get some introductions for folks who may not know you, and then we'll go ahead and get moving. So when we do the intros, let's remind the audience who you are, of course, but let's also talk about your connection to this topic, why it's important to you, why you wanted to be involved in this conversation. So we'll start, of course, with the Executive Director of Surgical Services, Strategy and Performance at ASSI, Mr. Jameed Billingsley. Welcome back to Clearing the Air.
What a long title. Thanks for having me back. I didn't get kicked out. I didn't get banned, so that's a good thing. The reason why this topic is important to me, it actually started before I was the primary voter on ST58 for Advanced Support Services. It started back when I was in a department, and I was trying to have huddle. I'm standing in front of, we had 5 hydrogen peroxide sterilizers, and I'm like, I'm getting choked up. My supervisor that was standing beside me was getting choked up, and it made me think, maybe this is not as safe as we think. So one of my goals when we opened up ST58 was to take a evidence-based look at the exposure that we have. We later got monitoring, and we realized that if we had all of these things on and they had the same exhaust cycle, we were exceeding the parts per million defined by NIOSH. And so I don't know if it was 5 because we didn't do any. It looks like I was interrupted, but we didn't do some scientific method of taking sterilizers out of the department one by one. But the point was, it was more exposure than we thought we even dreamed of having. So that's why I'm so connected to this topic, because there's departments out there with a lot of hydrogen peroxide sterilizers, AERs with peracetic acid, or other solutions that generate a chemical vapor. And we don't really think about monitoring them unless we think about what we want our kids to have a desk right beside them. And if you think about it that way, we might change the way we look at why monitoring is important.
Well said, Jameed. Thank you. Appreciate you being here. Always enjoy doing this with you together. So our next panelist participant, she is a clinical resource manager at ASSI and the president of the Keystone Alliance of Sterile Processing Professionals, Vanessa Frank. Vanessa, welcome back.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Jameed. It's always fun to sit down with you guys and talk about this because I feel like I've been seeing it more and more online, but at the same time, we're coming across people out in the industry in their hospitals who have no idea that this exists, the standard, the safety features, and it's kind of funny because when I stumbled into sterile processing, I didn't know what I was getting into, but we still had ethylene oxide. And I remember how incredibly seriously it was drilled into my brain that this little box on the wall, if it alarms, like, go, be gone. And while I think almost everybody, nobody's doing ethylene oxide in a hospital really anymore, our other chemicals are just have almost as high a risk or an equivalent risk. And it's not something that we're equating in our departments that, yeah, we might have gotten rid of ethylene oxide. It's very scary. It's a carcinogen, but everything else has a danger too. And I think that's why these conversations are so important, and answering questions from just anybody and everybody will get the information out there.
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa. I think that's really well said. And I think that, frankly, that what you just talked about was a key driver for many of the updates made in ST58 in 2024 in the first place. As we've talked about in previous episodes on this Clearing the Air series, staff safety is a huge emphasis in the latest update. And that's what a lot of the questions and comments have been around in the last year or so since the update has been put out. And that's, to your point, that's why we're continuing to have these conversations across the community, because it's important. And, before we jump into questions from folks around the country, we wanted to just quickly recap our roundtable event that we had in February with some of the key takeaways that we had, because we think that that's going to dovetail really nicely into the question and answer portion, which of course is the main focus of today's event. And so I just wanted to briefly cover some key takeaways from that roundtable event. I had 5 that I literally wrote down as Vanessa, Jameed, Tia Rouse, who may be making a special appearance later, and myself were talking. And I just want to share those with everybody because I think it'll really set things up for the rest of the conversation. And then certainly Vanessa and Jameed, if you have anything to add to that, please do jump in. So number one, the first key takeaway I had from the February event, and I think this was Tia that said this, AAMI ST58 is the "Am I Doing It Right" standard. I love that. I think it provides a lot of really great perspective and on the practicality of AAMI ST58, and it gives you a handbook, if you will, to follow for some of these things that we talked about in the roundtable. This is the way we've always done it. The update to AAMI ST58 helps challenge that status quo to make sure not are we doing it the way we always have, are we doing it the way that we should to maximize patient and staff safety. Number 2 key takeaway was that education is critical. Helping your team understand the why will help them better remember the how. I think that's such an important lesson, not just in the sterile processing department, but in life as well. Focusing on why, the mission of why we're doing things, that's going to help make the how stick any more than, or way more, I should say, than reading a 200-page standard will. Number 3, achieving compliance is like training for the Olympics. You have to do it every day. So this grounds us back in February when we had this conversation. The Olympics were just starting, and Jameed was making one of his patented comparisons to some current events. And you have to train every day to get it right. It's not something you can do once every 4 years and compete at the highest level. You've got to train for it every single day, just like safety in the SPD. Number 4, and this was from Vanessa, if you don't know, you don't know. That's put quotes around that and put Vanessa Frank after it. And really, this was in reference to real-time chemical monitoring being critical to staff safety. Vanessa, you hit the nail on the head. There's been a lot of talk about this lately, which is a great thing. Validating safe exposure levels. We're going to get into that. We're going to challenge each other on that in just a couple of minutes here. But I'll wrap it up with key takeaway number 5. There is no substitute for good documentation. It makes everything easier. I don't think we're going to get any pushback on that. Documentation is critical, and AMIA ST58 just makes that even more important, especially in the digital age. We talked a little bit about the future of sterile processing departments on that roundtable with AI and analytics. Certainly something that we need to focus on is documentation. So those were my key 5 that I was writing down during the panel about 6 weeks ago. But Jameed, Vanessa, anything that sticks out from you as you were preparing for this conversation from our roundtable in February?
I would say being a better customer. I think that's kind of how we need to start approaching everything at SPD. And this is just one of them, right? Managing the things, we do a really good job of managing our own people and our own kind of equipment and stuff at SPD. What we don't do a great job of it is managing the other things that are not directly, our direct reports, right? Like our vendors, vendor management, loan trays, water quality, all those things we could do an opportunity for improvement. This is another thing we need to increase our oversight on, is the safety of the people that work for us. And one of the things that I would say from that and learning more about it is there's X amount that you can do for yourself, but you can't provide full assurance of safety without another party or specialized equipment. So there's no sniff test. You can't smell if you're being exposed too much. And it may come when you're older or retired, but do we really want that to be our way of knowing if we had too much exposure? So I think we just need to think about overall how we can do a better job of managing that part of our responsibility as leaders and as technicians. Challenge your leader to say, hey, is this is safe? And if it's safe, how do we prove that it's safe?
I like what you said there about how the consequences of exposure might not be immediately, immediate to yourself, that, it might be years down the road and all of a sudden you're having mysterious health problems, and who knows how to track it back to those moments in your department where you're exposed to chemicals. It's better safe than sorry, as I was told as a kid.
Sometimes the lessons we learn, as we were talking about backstage, Vanessa, sometimes the lessons we learn as kids prove to be very true in adulthood. So Thank you both for that. We are going to jump into folks' questions now, what people are here to see us talk about. So we're going to get started. We did get a lot of questions from folks, so thank you for taking the time to submit those. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through the questions that were submitted ahead of time, and then hopefully we'll have some time at the end. I think we probably will, to take some questions from the chat as well. I'll remind you that this is the first time that our panelists are seeing a big chunk of these questions. So it should be a good conversation. And we are going to jump right into it with our first question. This is from Laverne in Florida. Laverne asks, what recommendations does the panel have for integrating continuous monitoring systems into ST58 compliant workflows to better document exposure control during chemical sterilization processes? Any takers for the first one there?
Okay, I guess I'll go because Jameed is not volunteering himself, which is fine. Yeah, so going from no gas monitoring to, full implementation isn't something you can do overnight. You can't just like pick up the phone and call someone, like ChemDAC and be like, hey, we need it in because we need to start doing this tomorrow. You really need to look at your workflow and how you are currently handling these chemicals and how the chemicals are working in your department with your staff. So identifying where that exposure could realistically occur. As Jameed said, in front of his 5 hydrogen peroxide sterilizers, all running at the same time, that was a risky zone in the department. So really taking that mental step back and being like, okay, where do we have these potentially dangerous chemicals within the department? How are people interacting with them? And looking at either if there's a way, like maybe you don't have the appropriate PPE for handling things when they come out of said sterilizers, gloves, eye protection, if that's not available, and say, for example, the cycle gets cut off early, there's peroxide on the outsides of your containers. I have been one of those where I wasn't thinking and I just pulled it out, and then I had the very stereotypical white burn marks on my hands, and that was on me because the PPE was there. So having the workflow in place, having the support for your staff, and educating your staff on the how to use things, where to use the appropriate PPE, is a way to just start looking at that process before you even would get in a monitoring system to give you that extra viewpoint.
That was a great answer. That was a great answer, Vanessa. The only thing I would add is let's start off with the SDS, right? Does our team have access to it, right? Because that's the truth. That's the truth, sir. And when you look at the SDS and it tells you specifically what the consequences and the hazards, then you can determine, all right, which parts of this workflow, which are all in ST58, right? Do we need to start from a risk mitigation perspective, right? How do we reduce the risk? Because monitoring is a part of it. For us, we realize, the old tradition of, okay, right before first shift comes in, let's start all of the sterilizers at the same time. That was a part of it. So it's a combination of things, and not just, like Vanessa said, oh, let's call this expert company in because, they have their expertise, but we're the expertise in the process. And so at every step, we should be trying to figure out how we can protect our team members so that all of them can work there to their 73 or the new retirement age of 48. But, are we protecting our team, and what are the risks? So the SDS can help us with that.
Yeah, and I really like the focus on the workflow. And I think that, Laverne's question here really focused on that compliance in the workflow is the critical part of that question. And Vanessa and Jameed, I think you both really hit that very effectively. You need to make sure you're looking at optimization and efficiency in your workflow first and foremost. And then the whole point of monitoring is to use it as a tool for staff safety and optimizing those workflows to make sure that your team members are not overexposed to chemicals like hydrogen peroxide. So I think that's, Laverne, I hope that answers your question, and certainly appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time to write into the group. The next question we're going to go to is from Margie in Wisconsin. And the reason I like this question is something we didn't talk about a ton in February, and that was Joint Commission. And Margie asks, where is the Joint Commission involved now that ST58 is being updated? How can we best support sterile processing department staff in the meantime?
So the reality as far as where the Joint Commission is involved, it's not necessarily a one accreditation agency or the other one, right? And all accreditation agencies are reasonable about how long they give you. So in standards terms, ST58 is relatively new, right? I think part of it is going to happen when they start going to hospitals that have implemented and are using the new ST58 recommendations, guidelines, shoulds, musts, and shalls, and then they come to your hospital. That's what you don't want. So I think part of the journey, regardless of what your accreditation agency is to start, right? I don't think the risk is that you don't have a fully hashed out super program. The risk is they come in and you're like, I don't know, or there's a new ST58. That's more likely to get you in trouble than not having a program as good as Vanessa's program was at her facility.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in there too, because I think there's, and you know, Jameed, Vanessa, let me know if you agree or disagree. I think there's been some misperceptions or misconceptions about the Joint Commission streamline of standards earlier this year with Accreditation 360. I think that really, some people saw that and they thought, oh, there's hundreds of regulations, hundreds of standards going away. That's not really the case, right? The whole idea and thought process is shifting away from standards, letter of the law, so to speak, to outcomes. Data-driven outcomes in particular is repeated a lot in Accreditation 360. And the other thing that's talked about is it's moving away slowly from that every 3-year window to a more of an ongoing relationship and year-round operational behavior. And so, we can talk potentially later in this conversation about maybe some questions that you might want to be prepared for when those conversations do happen. But I think that, really the key takeaway for me was this is a focus on continuous improvement and continuous safety and continuous compliance. It's not a sprint where you say, oh, we're in the window. We've got to stay up late and cram for the exam. Right. Vanessa, you're chuckling. I think you probably might have something to add to this.
Yeah, so I do. Where I previously worked, we were probably surveyed by various organizations at least 3 times a year. It was part of our governance. And when you have that almost continuous like eye on you, you just start getting into the habit of doing it the way you should be doing it, because you never know when they're going to show up. But that a lot of them are like, they're going to be coming to look in your drawers and check your closet. So that's what made me chuckle, is that you brought up the late night scramble of, oh no, let's quick clean the dust off the top of our workstations, and we have to put the lot numbers on this, and did we document for the last 6 months this process? And it's a lot more stress than just putting it in your workflow and educating your team, and then having that I just lost the word, that repetition of, okay, are we doing this? Come through, leadership circulates through the department. Hey guys, do you have any sticking points with documenting this process or this change that we made? Like, is there any way we could tweak it to be better? So it's just funny you brought that up, because if you just do it as best you can, and I know there's probably someone listening saying, well, she doesn't know my department, and I don't. Everybody has roadblocks, but that is the point of your leadership, is to look at the roadblocks and find a solution.
Yeah, Vanessa, what you said made me think of something, and that's that perfection is not the goal.
Yeah.
If you're, it should be, it should be something that, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, is something that I say a lot here with our team. Are we moving the ball in the right direction? That's what we want to focus on. I think, Jameed, that kind of goes to your comment on the previous question as well. Are we demonstrating compliance? Are we demonstrating that we're continually improving the processes in our department? Those are the things that people look for, right? Jameed, would you agree with that?
Oh, you're still muted, friend.
I couldn't have said it better. That's really the thing. Like, it's not a 0 to 100 race.
Yeah.
You just can't stay at 0, right? And it's just about how can I protect people more than they were protected yesterday till I get to the point where I can protect. Listen, we're realistic. And that's kind of our hallmark, that we don't say, oh, you can fix everything with $1 million. What are the steps along the way that we can make our team safer? And I just agree, when you're talking about accreditation, implementation, we're experts at writing evidence of compliance. And typically when you have a big problem, there's no way in 30 days that we can fix the whole big problem. And that's the same way with this implementation. It's not in 30 days that we have the full system up and running. It's, here's the steps that we've taken so far. Here's the steps that we're going to take in the future. So, and I think that cuts across every accreditation AT.
Yeah, well said, Jameed. Okay, let's get into some tough questions. One of the things we talked about was we're not going to shy away from some of the harder questions that come through, because this is an important dialogue to be having in the industry and with the community. So Lauren in New York asks, if our badge testing or routine industrial hygiene monitoring demonstrated that we were under the OSHA, do we need to monitor more often?
Interesting. So if you're under the limits, I can say from what I experienced at my previous facility is, if everybody was routinely under the limit, the badge monitoring became optional for said employee. If we had, for example, I had one lady who had a brush with cancer, and so that was something very forward on her mind, and she wanted that reassurance that no matter what she was doing, randomly through the year, hey, I want to do badge test. I think it should always be available to your staff, regardless of the facility policy or requirements, because safety is not just physical. Safety is also your state of mind. If you have somebody who has that just constant low thrum of anxiety just from being in the department, that does not benefit anybody.
Yeah, Vanessa, peace of mind has value.
That is a great answer. What I would say, and that's a great question. I think that's a great start. That is a great start. And that's when we start talking about, you don't have to get off this thing and buy this, the system. That's a great start to that. The part where I will challenge you is, how's your assignments? If I had a badge monitor for peracetic acid or hydrogen peroxide, but I worked in decon, or I worked on assembly, or I'm pulling case cards, that could give me a false sense of safety, because it's not monitoring the actual assignment that is dealing with hydrogen peroxide sterilization or peracetic acid the same. And if you're like 99.9% of the departments in the country, you rotate through. So the monitoring has to stay with the danger. The personnel monitoring is a great adjunct to it, but it's not a substitute to say, well, we don't need this because we have personnel monitoring, when the answer is, when you start talking about long-term exposure limits, and I'm not trying to bore you and do that, it's inaccurate, right? Because the long-term exposure is the environmental exposure, not the person that works in the center core. So the person who's the liaison and works in the center core is like, man, we don't have any danger of chemical vapor. And then there's somebody working the sterilizer thing that got overexposed today during the cycle, or when the peracetic acid process was over, and I opened the whichever AER liquid chemical sterilizer that we use, I got a big rush of it. But guess what? I didn't have on a badge, or the person who had a badge. So I think that's a part of the solution, not a substitute for. And You know, and again, I'm not trying to sell any system, but what I can tell you is you can have one of the reps come in and do some continuous monitoring for you to see if there is a need for further continuous monitoring. And there's a bunch of options that didn't exist just a few years ago that that can make sure that you have that monitoring that you want to protect your team without spending a lot of money. And again, the goal is not to jump from here to there. I like the idea of starting some personnel monitoring, but we also need to tie that in with some environmental monitoring as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jameed. And I'd like to make a point on this one as well, because this is something that I study and talk about a lot, of course, in my role at ChemDAC. And that's that, a lot of people talk about the permissible exposure limit for hydrogen peroxide in particular, which is that 1 part per million over an 8-hour time-weighted average. What that doesn't account for is short-term acute exposure, like what could happen during the opening of a sterilizer door, for example. And there's documented studies out there that show that there can be residual hydrogen peroxide in the chamber of certain sterilizers when you open the door. A lot of other countries around the world have figured this out and implemented short-term exposure limits for acute exposure. That's a 15-minute exposure limit. That's usually set, depending on the country, in the 2 to 3 part per million range. In fact, Washington State and Hawaii also have short-term exposure limits in place for hydrogen peroxide. And that is going to give you, to your point, Jameed, about some of these existing standards being incomplete, I think is a good word for it. The reality is that the OSHA permissible exposure limits, as we've talked about in this forum and others, they were adopted in 1971. And low temperature sterilizers with hydrogen peroxide didn't exist until the 1990s. So we're quite literally relying on old, half a century old data to inform our safety expectations and practices today, which I don't think it's controversial to say doesn't make any sense. And don't take it from me. OSHA says this as well. Go to their website where they talk about the OSHA permissible exposure limits. And it says directly on the website that many of the PELs are outdated and inadequate for protecting worker health. So something to consider as we're doing those risk assessments in our department to make sure we're capturing the real world exposure risks instead of just looking at that 8-hour time-weighted average. Okay, so great question. Appreciated that question. We're going to go to the next one. Let's see. We talked about some of these. This is a good one. This is from Ashley in North Carolina. She asks, what should leaders do first if their facility wants to align with ST58, but is not ready to redesign the department? That's a great question from Ashley.
Really good question, Ashley. The first thing is to go through on a high level. We like to do that book club method where we just kind of book club it, go through and say, oh yeah, we're good on this, we're good on that. And then you start saying, all right, this is something we're not doing. We're not monitoring this. We're not doing this practice, because ST58 is not just about monitoring. It's just really the part that really has gotten the most teeth in the publicity. And it's like really about how you deal with the chemical vapors and chemical sterilization methods. So I think you're safe from the department redesign. I would recommend that you kind of look at the things in ST58 and compare it to your best practice. And I'll steal this from Marianne Drobsnot because she said it out loud. And I told her, I was honest that I was going to steal it. Start off with your musts. Start off with your musts, then move to your shoulds, must and shall, move to your shoulds, and then you can get to your cans and mays. So highlight those in your copy of ST58, and then you can say, "Yep, we're good here." We're not doing that, and that will help you develop an action plan. But I highly doubt you're going to have to redesign your department unless you're doing ETO, in case you
Sure.
should have a properly designed department for that.
Yes, and to just piggyback kind of what you're saying is, as you're going through and you're starting to notice the changes that you need to make in your workflows, it's really great to do it. And then an inspector comes in, or a surveyor, and they're like, okay, well, can you prove it? So make sure that whatever documentation method you utilize, you don't have to change the world on that one either, but just make sure you're like, hey, we started with this and we noticed we were not compliant and we made this change and this is how we're doing it. We provided education, any resources that your team members need. Just show that you're aware and making, like Alex said, not those perfect movements, but you're making that forward progress.
Yeah, great point. Jameed, I want to hit something that you said about ETO. You hit a buzzword there with ETO. So there are still hospitals out there that are using ETO. We did get one question in through email that was asking about ST41 being retired. And just for those of you that don't know, ST58 did absorb ST41 and expand on it to talk about appropriate use of ethylene oxide in the department for the facilities out there that are still using it. Just to make a plug there that it is still covered, and ST58 brings everything into one place. We have got time for a few more questions. Oh, go ahead, Jameed.
I said that's a good plug. I saw a question in the comments that we might want to look at.
Yeah, sure. Let me go ahead and pull up the chat here. Was there one in particular that you wanted to take, Jameed?
Ebo HS, whoever that is, talked about H2O2 being found in every first aid kit and used directly on skin with no monitoring.
Yeah, I think I'm happy to jump in, and then certainly Vanessa and Jameed. I think Julie, you answered that question very well in the response there. It's all about concentration.
I know that the chat was all over it, and it's a good question.
It is a good question. Yeah,
that was answered in the chat. The only thing that I'll add, and I think Ebo was lobbing a softball, but I think sometimes we get comfortable when we use terms like, oh, hydrogen peroxide, like the hydrogen peroxide in our thing, or peracetic acid is just vinegar. And it's okay to be comfortable with it, but that's not actually what's happening, right? The concentration difference is one thing, but the hydrogen peroxide you're pouring on your cuts is not being vaporized, right? And so think about, it's funny that we talked about vaporization before, and we didn't have a real world application, but we do now, right? When everybody is at the bus stop and sneaking and getting a hit on their vape, right? and that's now nicotine solution being vaporized, right? Because it's efficient delivery. So that same hydrogen peroxide being vaporized, when we talk about peracetic acid just being vinegar, as technology gives us more efficient delivery of these things that kill microorganisms, it's also more penetrating and more dangerous to us even if something doesn't go wrong. So that's the only thing I would add to those great answers that were in the chat. You guys can come back to all of these because you guys know your stuff.
Yeah, no, and Jameed, I have to jump in there too, because first your comment about PAA being like vinegar makes me laugh, because I was at an event a few years ago where somebody was giving a presentation. It was not in the healthcare industry. I will clarify that, but they were talking about how PAA is like salad dressing, and it was completely harmless. And it was. We've come a long way since then, that's for sure. But I think a key point about hydrogen peroxide, vaporized hydrogen peroxide as well, is it's odorless. It's imperceptible at low concentrations, even those concentrations that can do harm when you're acutely and chronically exposed. And so, Jamid's point about why do we use sterilants and high-level disinfectants in the first place? It's to kill the bad stuff. So, not a huge leap to understand that that when you're breathing it in consistently, it's probably not great for us either. And there's, of course, a lot of science and data about that we'd be happy to share. Just reach out to Jamid, Vanessa, and myself, and we'll go deep into it. We've got a few minutes left. I want to get to as many questions as we can, so maybe we'll do a couple rapid fire rounds here. The next question, which is a great one from Dana in Tennessee. Does ST58 matter only for sterile processing, or does it also involve infection prevention, facilities, and safety? Great question from Dana.
Quick answer. ST58 is for infection preventionists, surgical services leaders, and SPD, because all of those departments have people who have a risk, and all of them have a duty to protect the risk of exposure. So great question, Dana. And please, if your SPD doesn't have a copy of the latest one, help them get a copy. If you have any questions, please reach out to us, and we can help you get your digital copy. And that way you'll have a copy, your SPD have a copy, and more importantly, your OR will have a copy as well. So all you guys need to have that copy so you can be on the same page.
All right, we're going to keep moving. I want to get to as many as we can. I'm going to jump down a little bit because anytime I see questioner prefers not to share name, I know it's going to be a good question. We're going to answer those here on Clearing the Air. What is the most common mistake leaders make when they try to support staff on chemical sterilization safety?
Ooh, this is a good one. So safety with chemical sterilization is a team effort. It's not a penalizing endeavor. Everybody has to work together towards the common goal of chemical sterilization safety. That is, yes, your leadership through process changes and education and things like that, but it also is everybody in the department making sure that I don't know, I open that AER and get a big old whiff of residual chemicals, and Jamid sees me and he just shrugs it off and walks along. That's not really looking out for my best interest, because who knows, it might be too much and I pass out and I hit my head, and then it's a whole nother basket of problems. So it's not a people problem. Like Jamid just put in the chat, you can't yell at the teams. It's like parenting. You have to be patient and understanding and have communication as a leader. So yeah, it just made me, his comment made me chuckle.
Yeah. No, thanks, Vanessa.
And the Vanessa trademark word, you got to set up guardrails.
He uses that word more than I do at this point.
Let's do two more because I like this one too, and I think this is a good one for everybody to weigh in on. This is from Felicia in Texas. How do you discuss exposure limits without making staff panic?
Do you want this one, Jamid? You look like you do.
I think that goes back to our little book club. I will. So I think it goes back to our little book club, because the staff is panicked because they've never heard of this and they're not aware of it. So if part of our job is to set them up, use the information right out of Amy, we don't even have to go to NIOSH or OSHA, because those references are already in ST58. And then here's the part where we start getting nervous. Once we tell them what the exposure limits, how are we going to prove that we're under it? That's where I think the nervousness comes from, because we don't know and we can't prove. So that's not a blame on staff. That's a blame on us in leadership to protect our staff.
Yeah, Tia Rouse said something in our roundtable panel that stuck with me and just popped in my head when you were talking, Jameed, and it was I was only afraid because I didn't know what I was doing. And I didn't have the evidence and the facts. And so I would answer this question again, which is a great one from Felicia in Texas. And that's, I would stick to the facts, right? Stick to the evidence, and know that there are a lot of people, and Vanessa, you just made this comment too. There are a lot of people that are working towards safe and effective sterilization. It's a team sport. And, the sterilizer manufacturers, the AER manufacturers, staff safety is now more than ever a key component of their engineering, their designs, their new product releases, and that's a good thing for everybody. And so when you talk about exposure limits, those are there as guides to make sure that we're keeping our team members safe. But that workflow is important. Your selection of technology in the department is important, and then the conversations that you have with your team are critical, because when people don't have the data and the evidence and the information, they substitute their own. That's the way it always goes. And so we want to focus on the facts. We want to focus on what's real. And that's going to be the best practice for how to answer that one. So Felicia, thank you for that question. So we will get to the final question here, being mindful of the time. I appreciate everybody that's been sticking around to have this conversation with us. This is from Dave in North Carolina. And I want to bring this back to practical. I know that we've been spending a lot of time talking in this series about the fact that we're moving away from being audit driven and things like that, because we want to focus on everyday behavior. The reality is people still want to ask these types of questions. So what types of questions should I expect to see in surveys and audits related to ST58?
Well, I can kick off, and then thank you, good sir. And then Jimmy can hit whatever I probably will miss. But I can tell you, as we do clinical assessments, and it's on our list of, do you monitor your chemical sterilization and high-level disinfection? That's, if a place does not, then that point is moot. But let's be real, it's fairly common. And so our question is, and it's not just like a aha gotcha. It's, you've got 35 people on your staff and you're not monitoring their chemical safety. You, leadership of the department and above, are not doing your best for your team. And so that then begins the conversation of, okay, well, have you done a risk assessment? Have you looked at your process? Can you back up why you're not doing that? Me personally, my personal opinion is that you should be monitoring, because you can't really put a dollar sign on people's safety. That, me, morally speaking. But yeah, so that's, like I said, that's we come to that section, and that's our first question of, are you doing it? And if not, why? Go ahead, Jimmy. You've got something to say. You're muted again, friend.
I think that's pretty close to what accreditation surveyors are going to ask, right? Like, how are you monitoring and reducing the risk from exposure? They're not going to ask you about a particular company or what you're doing. And so, like you said, everything you said is totally correct. One of the responses we get back when we're doing our accreditation preparation surveys is, well, but it's so expensive to monitor. And I was like, do you have a quote? Who told you it was expensive? And so I think that there's, to your point of making up information, Alex, they don't have a quote. They don't know how expensive it is. And unfortunately, when it comes to personal protection of extra staffing or asking for new equipment. So let's be careful let's be careful out here, medical device reprocessing nation, that we don't go, well, we know chemical monitoring is expensive. How do you know? Do you have a quote? And we don't want to sound like the same thing we're complaining about when we say we need a new sterilizer or we need more staff by internally putting a glass ceiling on that. So to me, this is as important as anything that we get right, because those instruments, they're important for tomorrow. But the safety of all the people that work here are important for decades and decades if you do it right.
Yeah, well said, Jameed. I think that's a good place to wrap up the Q&A portion, where we've gone about 50 minutes or so here, which is awesome. There's still some questions that are out there. We might have to end up doing this again, which is I know you two will be up for it. But so we've come to the time in our program where we're going to give each of you the last word. This is wild card round. Anything you want to say, anything you think we missed, any questions that you saw that you want to foot stomp, any advice you want to give, I'll give each of you a minute or two for your last word for the team here.
Vanessa?
Oh, well, you were still unmuted. I figured you'd just go. I would say what comes to mind is ask the questions. If you're sitting here and you're watching this and you're like, oh, I really, and this is all of the information that you currently have in your brain about ST58, learn some more, because whether you're aware or not, surveyors are going to hold leadership accountable for what is required. So do the research, and then take that mental step back and look at your department and say, is my team safe? Am I doing my best for them? Tag, you're it, Jameed.
Great advice. So the VP of operations over at the place we love, and that we'll all be here to answer some questions at HSPA, as how do we leverage our association standards, industry partners, and chapters to bring this topic to the forefront?
Glad you went there. Yep.
I think that is a complex but simple answer. Look at the people in the industry and the companies in the industry that are supporting chapter meetings, right? And give them a forum to join your chapter and talk about some of these safety things, because it's not about selling more product. It's really the reason that I've enjoyed this series. It has been a huge success by any of the behind the scenes metrics as far as engagement. But the reason why I enjoy it so much is more people are talking and thinking about protecting the people in their department than were before we started that series. And if by that measure, that's the most important metric for me. So thanks, Alex, for hosting this and giving us the platform to talk about it. And let's continue these conversations. And if you want to have an in-person conversation, if we decide to do another mailbag, we'll all be at HSPA. So we do want to engage with you, and we want to answer the questions and maybe answer some questions we can't say online, right? So come by and see us. Come to the ChemDAC booth. Vanessa and I will be in and out of that booth as well. So I look forward to seeing you and answering any of your questions about ST58. And I can introduce you to the co-chair, Orlando Centron, shout out, of the work group system.
We're going to have to send Starlink to Jameed's house, I think, to boost up the internet signal a little bit there, Jameed. But that was a great wrap up. Shameless plug for HSPA. That is just a few weeks away. I know we are all going to be there. We're excited to see so many people in person. Please do swing by the ChemDAC booth. Vanessa and Jameed will be there. And shameless plug, ChemDAC is celebrating our 20th birthday this year at the ChemDAC booth. There may be or may not be some treats and surprises for folks that swing by. But to Jameed's point, stop by, challenge us, have conversations with us, learn how to earn more continuing education credits on these topics, because we've got a lot of opportunities to do that. And outside of HSPA, this is a very accessible group. Jameed, Vanessa, and myself have these conversations every day. We want to be there to help you raise the standard of safety in your department. So until next time, thank you. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. I'm going to sign off the way that I have the last couple of times, because we are going to continue to bring these educational events to you. And I am going to tell you that we are all on the same team when it comes to safe and effective sterilization in your department. Have a great day, everybody.